before we delve into the conversation, I would take a minute and ask our speakers here to please introduce themselves to the audiences.
My name is Rahul Kashyap. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of PR Professionals, PRP Group. And I have the experience of more than 20 years delving in media and now in public relations. So I have seen both sides of the fence. And that is a transition that seems to be natural these days. Uh, so it's been more than 10 years in public relations now, strategy and crisis management.
Sure.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's an absolute privilege to be here amongst industry peers. Some of you have known and some of you I hope to know better by the end of this summit. And thanks to Anurag and team for putting together a fabulous event. I'm really looking forward to the agenda and the award ceremony later in the day. Just to quickly introduce myself, I'm Achal. I've been the last 16 years. Started as a student in PR and communication, and then moved on to agencies, worked with the Formative Perfect Relations as my first stint, and then worked with certain big tech clients before moving to Max Bupa, where I was there for almost a decade, steering their corporate communications department. Post that, I worked with Amazon in the policy comm space for 3 years. And very recently, 3 months ago, I moved to Mars Petcare. And I'm not sure if all of you know, but this is the largest pet food company in the world and in India. And now I'm helped with the task of making that known to all the pet parents and consumers. So really happy to be here.
Thank you, Achal. Sadia?
Hi, good afternoon. First of all, thank you for having me here. It's a privilege. Quick introduction about myself. So I'm Sadia Khan. I come from an auto background. I know, there are very few females in the automotive industry, but yeah, I take the privilege of saying that yes, I've been there for 14 years, and in those 14 years, I've worked with various automobile brands, including Polaris, off-road vehicles, Indian motorcycles, launching Indian motorcycles in India, motorcycles in India, worked with Volvo Eicher into commercial segment, launched their buses and trucks, and then finally moved to MG Motor India. MG, I'm assuming that everybody here knows about MG Motor India. So I'm currently working with them as communications manager, and that's why I feel I'm here. And during these 14 years, I've been at various levels of communications, marketing, and PR. And I feel that the topic that we all are here for is very important for us to discuss, because every one of us faces either of the way, in either of the ways we face crisis. Being an automotive, communication professional, it is very important for us to know how to deal with it. However, every crisis comes out to be very different. So yeah, let's see. I am looking forward for the impactful conversations here and have everybody's point of view. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sadia. I would set the tone and ask the first question to you only. Help me understand, how do you really look at an internal and external crisis? What are some of the most important parameters that it holds, and how do you look at it from a communication specialist point of view?
So Soumya, I feel like I just said, every crisis comes out to be very different. It's very difficult to foresee any crisis, and of course their comeback strategy also has to be crafted accordingly. But yes, some protocols and some formats can be laid down. For me, I would say I first try and dig out the root cause, understand what and why first, dig out the root cause, grasp the challenge accordingly, check, assess the ripple effect, of course, how it goes. Is it a blip or a wave? Is it going to stay for long, or it's going to sustain, and then plan the strategy accordingly. For example, in automotive sector, it's almost every day then some of the other crisis comes in. It can be anything related to some sort of miscommunications also. Sometimes products are not understood because of a lot of technology that comes in automobile these days. Sometimes some customer escalations do comes up, so there has to be a very different strategy. How do we tackle it? I can say basics would be, internally you have to swiftly align your internal teams, respective teams that needs to be aligned. That includes product development, your quality control, your after sales team if it's needed, or the relevant stakeholders probably if it's dealer partner, and then your communications team. And the rapid response approach, I think, of course, plays an important role. And being transparent is what I feel is more important, because being transparent, doing the right communication being more empathetic to the customer if it has something to deal with customers, and right way and right platform acts in your favor and brings resilience to the business.
Sure. So Rahul and Achal, my next question is for you. We've seen significant changes in the business and communication landscape, and so in the nature of crisis. So do you also feel that there's been an overhauling in terms of crisis that used to hit us a couple of decades back and now? And also, are there any crisis situations that are perhaps more prevalent these days or frequently occurring these days? Take us through that from an agency point of view and a brand point of view.
So I think Rahul can go first.
Thank you. In fact, COVID only highlighted this, and I'm sure we'll be hearing more about this term. We are in a world now which deals with polycrisis. No single crisis is a standalone crisis.
Yes.
One has a consequence on the other, and therefore this is a situation of polycrisis that we are living in. And adapting to that and facing it, handling it, tackling it is therefore not an easy thing.
Sure.
One has to have a complete idea of the potential damage in the immediate term and also the long-term damages a crisis can do. By definition, crisis is sudden. You're not really prepared for it. For example, post-lunch audience handling them is a crisis. So this is a crisis that nobody wants to face. But here we are, the four of us, facing this. So it is difficult, especially crisis by definition, because you're unprepared for it. You're caught unawares, and therefore, unless you have your feet on the ground, a lot of common sense goes into it. And you realize the consequences. I think that is the most important part, whether it is an internal crisis or an external crisis. Maybe as some people.
All right, thanks for that, Sadia and Rahul. I think those are very enlightening views on how, the definition of crisis is evolving. And just adding a layer to what Rahul was saying. So in my experience, I think earlier crisis, when I entered the industry, and I was actually servicing brands on the other side, the time that they would approach an agency to help you tackle the crisis was when it was an external media crisis.
Correct.
You've got a negative coverage, or you're anticipating a really bad story, or you've got something that's really hugely damaging because your competitor has made a claim on you, against your business. So that would be called a typical crisis. I think as the industry has evolved, I think we know that crisis, not everything is really crisis, right? So I think, for example, if you look at Mars, we have certain, and when I say Mars, I mean Mars Pet Care, Mars Wrigley, and across Mars businesses, we have devised, a crisis strategy where, we know what is going to be crisis for us. So one, if it's going to be something that impacts our people or our associates, as we call them, something that's going to impact our manufacturing, because we are heavily into manufacturing of confectionery and pet food, etc. So something that damages the plants or the ecosystem surrounding the plant, or hampers our operations within a specific country. We are present across many, many countries, so something that hampers our operations. Or if something is going to be a massive threat to our reputation, or causes, sort of existential crisis in that particular country. So then those are the, reasons why we would pivot and say, okay, this is a crisis. So I think that's important to segregate, so you can have a strategy in place. I think what has changed now is that people understand that because crisis can come from anywhere, it's important to identify your stakeholders and how you communicate to them for that crisis. So for example, if I know internally somebody's been hurt at the plant, or if an employee has had some exigency, or has had an accident, before it goes outside, if you identify that as a potential crisis, then you will act accordingly. Similarly, externally, if there is something, there's a geopolitical tension or etc., your strategy will be very, very different and very long-winded, because there's no immediate way to address that crisis. And of course, if there's a crisis, it can be on social media. Because 10 years back when we started, the social media wasn't as big. And then the definition of social media has been evolving. First it was all about Facebook, and then it was suddenly all about Twitter. Now the credibility of Twitter is going down, and a lot of it is about on other platforms that are emerging. So with social media coming in, crisis can be from one tweet, that can not just be from outside, but can be from an employee who mistakenly did something, and that's something I've seen in my career. So crises exist in varied forms. I think the best way to tackle them is if culturally you have imbibed it in your DNA that you're prepared to mitigate crises before they happen. So rather than waiting for them to happen. For example, at Mars, we have a huge focus on quality, on safety of not just how we manufacture food, but also of how we take care of our people who are working in those factories or for employees who are working with us otherwise. So I think if you have that imbibed in your cultural DNA, the possibility of crisis arising out of incidents which can be mitigated is taken care of. But yes, having said that, if they do come up, then I think every company needs to have a certain strategy and involve all stakeholders to kind of manage that better.
In fact, I'll just add one bit. Technology has decentralized and democratized a lot of communication that happens, but it has also put to risk because it has empowered everyone, and everyone becomes a potential risk for companies and brands. So the risk to the reputation of brands is constant.
Absolutely.
While earlier we used to think that it can happen once in a while, companies were not prepared for it. But now, and because we have a large clientele at PRP, I can tell you right from real estate to crisis-prone and crisis-driven, companies in some ways. So it is very difficult to have, a universal template for crisis management.
Correct.
So it is very dynamic, and one has to, constantly keep updating oneself.
Absolutely. Taking cue from the answers, we understand that the social media is a convenient platform for the naysayers to put forward their opinion, and they have the potential to drive, a crisis from bad to worse for a company, right? How do you ensure that no negative perceptions, at least on the social media, hover around your brand, and how do you ensure that the digital buzz is intact? So what is your strategy when it comes to a crisis on the social media? Do you have a separate plan, or how do you deal with it basically?
So so I'm going to take a lead on this because this is something I'm really, really passionate about and also learning more about, because I don't think there is, like he said, it's so dynamic. You can't say that there's one solution, there's one strategy.
Correct.
But I think on social media, we have to, kind of be prepared that if a brand has put itself out there on social media, or if it's a brand which people are going to talk about on social media, you have to be prepared and have an appetite that, things will be good and things will go bad. You need to see what you need to react to, right? You can't 100% control and have a positive narrative around you. People are going to discuss you, but I think the right strategy is to become a part of that narrative and not try to over-control
Sure.
it. So for example, in a couple of companies I've worked with, without being very specific, I can say that we've always encouraged the leadership team. I personally told all the leaders that, if a conversation is happening about your brand, even if it's a negative conversation and you spot it, take ownership, say that, okay, I'm going to look into it, I'm looking into it, I'll get back to you, and then make sure that, there is an escalation matrix that takes care of it.
Correct.
Because then people know you're not here to only tom-tom about your brand, but you're actually looking after your brand and you take responsibility.
Sure.
So similarly, so basically, not just the brand handle being, being the sort of, the place where your brand is kind of projected, but making sure that the leaders behind the brand are also talking, involving your employees, because these days employees also are like, you can make them your proud brand ambassadors, but it's a double-edged sword, right? Because as we saw when the layoffs happened, a lot of employees were, they had genuine issues. So a lot of big brands suffered because of that as well. So I think it's always a double-edged sword. So it's very important to have SOPs and, basically social media communication protocols in place for every organization so that employees are cognizant of it. So I think having that structural processes has become very important because now more and more employees are on social media and they have access to that.
Sure. Okay, Sadia, do you have any inputs here?
Yeah, I think I echo what Achal just said. With social media, of course, having there, the crisis unfolds very swiftly and expects an agile communication strategy. Having said that, you can of course have an escalation matrix. Like for example, since I work with NG currently, so what I can say about the strategy that we follow is we make a cross-functional team which has all the respective people from all the different stakeholders, including some designated spokesperson, having rapid response protocols in place so that we know when and what to react and who is the right person to communicate, So at times it maybe has to be the communications head, or maybe it has to be our MD if needed, But what you need to really act on is this group all together acts within like minutes of when and as soon as we receive this crisis situation. It can be anything. It can be any customer escalation. It can be any review also that talks about the products, not so good quality of the products. Let's say, for example, hypothetically, I'm just saying. So that has to be addressed well under that group, and we ideally have tackled, and the response ratio has been really good. So I can say that it has really worked, because if you have all the relevant people in one group and acts quick on it, I think it really works in favor of the business also, and at the end brings more trust towards the brand, that you have been more transparent, you have shared everything very open-endedly, and you are just accepting that this has been the scenario, reaching out to the person directly on time. I think for me that really works well.
Sure. Rahul, could you give us a sense of how, whenever there is an escalation of a crisis, the crisis reaches its tipping point, how do you, on the other end of the spectrum, representing a couple of brands, how do you, resurrect their image back? What is your contribution when a client of yours, when a crisis hits a client of yours, how do you look at it?
See, for this, an agency brand understanding that trust is very important. That brand has to have a lot of faith in in the agency and the kind of work that you have done. So if that trust is there, you can give really honest solutions to them. And most of the times I have seen they are willing to accept it. In terms of resurrecting the brand reputation, one thing is very important. Truth plays a very important role. So if there is transparency, if the stakeholders realize that there is truth and transparency in what we are communicating, that's very important. That helps a lot. So that is the first step in that direction. Secondly, there are number of positive things that the company has already done. And sometimes we ignore them. So coming out with those positive stories, placing them bravely before the media and other stakeholders, that we are here to stay and we are here to face every challenge together. So that trust again with the stakeholder becomes very important through those positive stories. Thirdly, in terms of business and reputation put together, I think it is important for the management to come out again, as I said, a very committed management who are willing to spend every penny and protect every penny of the shareholders. So that is very important. I think from a media perspective, from a business perspective, and from a reputation perspective, everything put together has to get into that strategy. And the strategy doesn't always have to be, something that gives you immediate benefits.
Sure.
So we'll have to make that distinction between immediate, mid-term and long-term benefits.
This also reminds me asking you, how do you measure the more tangible KPIs like likes, shares and comments? So that is relatively easy to calculate, right? But how do you actually look at the intangible ones? Brand value, loyalty. How do you act as an agency? How do you gauge those numbers?
See, we also work in the field of political communication. Elections is
Right.
a tangible matrix by itself. We do that. But I'm sure, reputation is something which is tangible and also not tangible at the same time.
Correct.
That is the most important part as an agency. Reputation protection is the first thing that we are entrusted with. I think the first step is to get into the share part and how the media coverage is there and what is the feedback. Social media now helps a lot in terms of the feedback from the stakeholders.
Employees, as we all understand, they hold important voices when a crisis hits the company. This question is open to the three of you. Have you ever witnessed or encountered a situation where the employees shook hands with the management and eventually rescued the company out of that difficult time? Did you witness anything?
Yeah, most certainly I did. So I think in my previous company, Amazon, I've seen that happen a couple of times where, a lot of employees have shown receptiveness It's not been like a formal handshake or something of that sort, not strategic in that sense, but I think very organic, where, employees have seen that, somewhere the brand or the company that they're associated with is being seen in a wrong light. And, as responsible employees and, an informed set, they have tried to enlighten, the real facts and, bring to light what's happening in a very objective way. So I think that happens automatically, but I think the thing is that if you make, like I said, you empower your employees to be your ambassadors, they'll automatically do that. For example, you see a lot of employees, resharing, their experiences when they complete work anniversary, saying, "Oh, come work with me," right? So that is when they become your advocates. So I think encourage them to constantly be your advocates is a long-term strategy that brands should invest in. Because when something like this happens organically, you will see that they'll go to the brand's rescue, and I think that is a far more believable sort of, like he said, ultimately you have to speak the truth. But when it comes to the people themselves from within the company, it's always good. But I also feel it's a double-edged sword, because when a crisis is happening, a company would want to speak a certain way, and not speak a certain way. So it may not be the best thing to always arm your employees with all the information, and you can't do that. At times things are sensitive, and there's, your employees are a part of your communication strategy. So you're also first speaking to them, and then, speaking to the outside. But because I feel employees in most companies who have sales employees are, speaking to people on the ground, they're connected directly to the customers, making sure that they are your first stakeholders is critical when you face any communication. So they are armed with the right information. And when anything comes to them, whether it's formal or informal challenge, channels, or even grapevine for that matter, which is super important, right? So they can tackle it for you. So I think they are your army in that sense.
Rahul or Sadia, do you have any inputs here?
Sure. I would surely like to add, because besides communications, I also take care of internal communications, and I know how important it is to keep your employees and respective colleagues on the same platform. So I and the team, the rest of the team, we ensure that before anything goes on social media, we try and do our best to inform our employees, because they should not get it. They should the first information that they get should be official from the official communications team, and they should know what is right to say and what is not supposed to be said. Sometimes a lot of scenarios that arises, which is being handled internally by a lot of organizations. I would not name any organization there, but I would say the employees and the teams all together plays a pivotal role there, because they are going to be a word of mouth externally, be it to anybody who aspires to join your organization, or be it anybody, let's say any friends or colleagues also from the different industry. So your employees are very important, and if they are your positive advocates, it really works in your favor. How do you do that? I think, of course, like for your external stakeholders, similarly, your internal stakeholders should also have that transparency. How do you communicate that? I think if it's coming from from someone who's a designated spokesperson like MD, or doing various town halls, if you're keeping right information and sharing those right information at the right time, I think keeps them motivated. They have this trust which is built in the brand, and they feel more connected towards you, because they really feel that they feel obliged that we have been shared this internal information first, and rather than spreading it out together. So I think that few small things that really matters, but I think should be a practice for every organization.
In fact, in recent history, there is no bigger crisis to hit us than COVID. And that was a really testing time for all of us, both as individuals and as companies. Any company is driven by the people it has. So, and that was a truly testing time that nobody could have imagined earlier. And that was one time when our internal communication mechanism, I think at PRP, worked really well. One was to assure everyone that there is not going to be any retrenchment. So that was the first communication that went from us. That removed some bit of nervousness, and there was, a reciprocal commitment from the employees that will work hard. We had not experimented with work from home ever, and I think every employee, wherever he or she was, whether he was stuck in his place, or he was in Delhi or anywhere, all our offices, they were willing to give more than 100%. So that was the first step that resulted in that, employee and employer trust that developed at our place. The third was also to provide trust to our clients, that these are very difficult times and we are with you. Whether your business is not doing well or it's doing well, we are with you in this moment of crisis. And that again, that ecosystem of trust that we were able to build internally as also externally helped our business really well. When we came out of pandemic, I think the reason why our business soared was we have 95% retention of our clients. There is hardly any, the attrition rate is low at our place. And COVID, we could utilize COVID as an opportunity of internal communication as also with client retention. So that is something that I always share as a learning.
This is wonderful, sir. My next question is for the ladies. So we understand that not all crises come from the front door. There are instances or ideas that are silently affecting your consumers and which is causing churn. How often do you take your consumers' feedback? That's one. And were you able to spot any roadblocks ahead in time and you were actually able to work on them at a later stage?
That's a very, very good question. Thanks for that. The thing is that especially when you are in a manufacturing business or in the business of food, like we are, which goes to the human chain and also the animal, animals. So I think it's very, very important to constantly be very conscious of, following the right safety and quality standards. At Mars, we have these 5 principles. And if you look at our global annual scores of 20,000 associates or employees, I think 97% of them believe that we actually live by those principles. So they are not like words on the wall. And one of those principles is quality and responsibility. So it is a part of that principle that, we are constantly monitoring what is the food that's going out, what is the kind of packaging that we are following, is there any sort of contamination that's happening, any infestation that's happening, and, we take it very, very, very seriously. And I think that's the reason why, Mars has been able to build its legacy of over 100 years, because that runs in the DNA of the company and every company associate, who works here. So I think, yes, there are several protocols in place, not one, which I can pin down and say, okay, we do this. But I think the way we are wired, I think there is constant, eye out to see if something is going wrong. There are various processes, mechanisms at the manufacturing unit. There are SOPs in place. There's daily reporting, tracking. Everything that before it goes in the human chain or goes, to the animals is tested, checked. Even the raw material sourcing is not just, it's not just responsibly sourced, but, even the quality checks, etc., are in place. So I think that's a constant sort of thing that we are into. But, also we have a mechanism where, if any customer escalation comes to us, we study that, from a trend pattern perspective. That, for example, there was a time where, we were seeing certain, certain packaging was resulting in, leakages, and there were certain issues. So we self-corrected it before, it became massively big. So we have those kind of processes in place, and that's why I think I can very proudly say there's been no case or no crisis so far in the history of being in this country for 25 years where somebody said that, oh, we need a product recall. So being in the, the food and the pet food category, to say, a company say we've not had an instance of product recall, which is really big or major, is a big claim to make. So I think that's why I said that, it really has to be in your culture to get it right.
That is commendable. Sadia?
So yeah, I think I really feel with this dynamic industry and automotive very specifically that I would like to talk about, because I see before pandemic there were different scenarios altogether. The industry changed after pandemic. A lot of supply chain issues happened and everybody was just going way, and there were shortages of the parts. So we faced very different challenges altogether. But yes, of course, to understand, to overcome that with the right strategy, I feel is a way. But to address your question, like you said, I feel constantly checking on what's going around the wave. Sometimes it's good to flow with the wave, but sometimes it's also have to have your safety protocols in place. So I feel with social media coming in, a lot of people for automotive industry per se, I would say, people feel that they, of course, give their opinions, their views. So you need to really have sentiments checked around your brand. It can be positive, it can be negative. So that is on your prediction. How do you assess it basically? So a regular assessment of these, social media monitoring makes and adds value. Of course, regular customer feedbacks does makes value to it, because I think the industry that I deal with, the company that I'm working with, it's very important to know what your customer feel, how satisfied are they. It is not just one day that you've sold the car. It's a life cycle. You really have to live up to them, live up to those expectations, be there for next 10 years till they own the car, help them probably resell the car also. So it's a life cycle, that you partner with. So you really have to be there, check what they feel, live up to those expectations and work accordingly. So this is what I feel, I think really, really matters, to have your, surveys in place, your various recognitions on those areas, which really brings in trust from the customers as well.
Sure. In the interest of time, we'll quickly wrap this session with this one last question. Your 2 cents, 3 of you, your 2 cents, your one advice to, companies that are having a bad time. How can they still aspire to be back in action? And what is your one advice basically for companies in a challenging situation right now?
Just, and I'll keep it really short because I see 30 seconds on the timer. I think it's about the fact that as you want to scale in size, especially to startups, they're very, very hungry for growth. I think it's very important to make sure that you win the customer's trust, because that will what bring the customer back to you and, have that sort of repetition value and retention value. So I think to win customer trust, you can't compromise on, your product quality, safety, etc., etc. So I think whatever business you're in, being sure that, keeping eyes on winning customer trust is super important. And I think if you have that right, everything else in the chain flows. So I think that's super important.
I think I'll extend that argument to conviction. If there is strong conviction and you are true to your product and you go to the customers with it, I think you can again resurrect yourself, even your reputation is dented.
Sadia.
I'll put it very simple. I would say assess the learnings of your post-crisis analysis, learn from it, and let it be the compass guiding your comeback strategy for the brand's revival, basis irrespective of whatever the nature is. But I think that will surely guide you the right way of doing things properly. Be it, it could have been better, it could have been best, but of course that could be your compass to take you way ahead.
Thank you so much for sparing time on a weekday. We are very grateful to have you with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you.